Good evening. So we're going from the future zone to the past. So just put on your ripple effect, and we'll go into the past here with Susie's movie. As he said, my name is Taylor Whitney. I started Preserving the Past in 1997 after working in film preservation for several years in Hollywood. And the reason I started the company was because there were a lot of films and photographs that were languishing in garages and attics and warehouses and not getting the attention that movies in Hollywood was getting for preservation and restoration. And I strongly believed and still believe and founded the company on the fact that these films and images deserve just as much attention as Hollywood movies, and trying to preserve them without the Hollywood budget is a challenge in and of itself. In 2004, I left Los Angeles and I came to school at Ryerson, and I have a master's degree, and it was a new program at the time in photographic preservation and collections management, which brought together library science with museum studies with a focus in photographic preservation. And it was a year here at Ryerson and a year at George Eastman House, which is now George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York. And so that's how I got from the West Coast to the East Coast. And it was also here that I met our colleague, Susan Patrick, who was the librarian for the Photographic Preservation and Collections Management program. And it turns out that Susan made movies as a teenager. And she wrote scripts, she enlisted her family and friends to act in them, they made props and costumes and attended rehearsals, and she shot them on Super 8 film and edited them in her basement on a little tiny editor that she bought with pinky stamps. If anybody remembers those from, what was the name of that? Steinberg's grocery store in Montreal. They were, for us, it was like S&H green stamps. I remember my parents used to collect them. Let me just refer to my notes here for a second. So she made her first movie in 1967 using a K7148 Keystone Super 8 camera, and that she had gotten for her 15th birthday. And she was 15 and she was at Westmount High School in Montreal, and she was writing serialized stories for her school newspaper, and she got the idea to turn these stories into a movie. A scripted home movie is what we call it. And the stories were inspired by The Girls from St. Trinian's, if anybody remembers that, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And the first movie that she made was about schoolgirl spies who rescue the princess from being kidnapped. So I just wanted to poll the audience. Was anybody here an aspiring filmmaker, and that's how they got into the technical aspects of film rather than film? Except for Kurt Markham, who's here too. One of the things that we've discovered doing this work is there's a lot of people that had to go on to take the sensible route and actually earn a living, and they couldn't pursue their childhood dreams of being filmmakers. And that's what Susie did. She became a librarian. She was a librarian here. She just retired from the Ryerson Special Collections Librarian and Archives. So the first clip I'm going to show you is a trailer that we produced for this first movie that we finished and screened for her family and friends at a theater here in Toronto called the Camera Lounge. And we brought people together that hadn't been together in 40 years that acted in the movies. And it was just really fun.
Falcon Films presents.
From the vaults of Falcon Films, Susan Patrick's 1967 masterpiece, The Adventures of the Girls from SMPTE, an organization dedicated to combating the forces of evil and destruction and maintaining the peace and security of the Commonwealth of Nations. The Girls, Maud Montague, Montapop Hyden, Petula Paddington, Priscilla Throgmorton, Victoria Melton Mowbray. Their leaders, the Honorable Harriet Bertram Farquhar, OBE, and her assistant, the giddy Agatha Fortescue. The enemy, the mysterious cult of the Black Mushroom. Led by the notorious Bertie the Red, aided and abetted by her partner in crime, Grimstolf. The cultists performed their sinister ceremony. The case, the kidnapping of Princess Alexa of Arunia. The Arunian authorities are desperate. Grimstolf and Bertie torment the princess. But just around the corner are the girls from Titty. Will the girls save the day? The Adventures of the Girls from Titty. Coming soon to a theater near you.
So even that they're scripted home movies and they were made in the 1960s and early 70s, I still wanted to take the most professional approach I could and try to work with the footage that we had and the campy content, but try to make it as professional, but also honoring the era in which it was made. For instance, we didn't use transitions that you could get in 2009. We were true to what she could have done had she an optical printer in her basement, and just used pretty basic dissolves and fade in and fade out. The second movie that we restored for Susan is called The Closet Murders, and each movie has sort of inherently gotten a nickname, and this one became The Closet Murders Resurrected. And it's a campy murder mystery about what happens when this person, Nicholas Kartoffel, dies and the provisions of his will. And I'm going to show you now a trailer, a work-in-progress trailer. And it's Susie doing the voiceover, but we'll be having a voiceover artist do it when we get further along.
After the mysterious death of Mr. Nicholas Kartoffel and the shocking provisions of his will, murder and mayhem ensue.
So you might want to be reminded that this was Super 8 film with no sound. And when Susie screened them for her family and friends, they had like world premieres, and she sent out hand-painted invitations, and they all wore their furs, and they came to the house, and it was like this gala affair. She would play... You okay? It wasn't me. She would play the record player of the music and then play the film. And in the first movie, her sister was playing piano while the film was running. And then also the projector had speed. So to do the chase scene, she would speed up the film. And then, so she had to do that all. But now with the digital, of course, we could do it on there. Okay. At the end of The Prisoner, or The Closet Murders, we had a lead into the next film that we were to work on, which was The Prisoner of New Glasgow, which is the topic tonight. And we decided to use a masterpiece mystery theme, so we had our voiceover artist imitate Vincent Price, who was Vincent Price for us.
The Prisoner of New Glasgow is a turn-of-the-last-century period piece set in the mythical country of Arunia. The then teenage filmmaker takes us on a fanciful journey in her exciting tale of love, duty, adventure, and conflicting loyalties.
So this kind of work has opened us up for my business to a niche market of independent filmmakers that let their films languish while they had to get real jobs, as I mentioned earlier. For instance, this woman, Aletha, who had made a student film in 1978 called Transitions. And I found this really interesting. It's a poignant tale of going through life stages. I'll show an edited version of her 3-minute movie. But it was shot on Super 8 film, and if everybody remembers the little reel, it was only 50 feet long, and that makes 3 minutes. So it was just really challenging to shoot the footage and then send it off to the lab and get it back, and you're not sure how it's going to turn out. Much different than shooting on the iPhone, as we have today. This doesn't have any color correction or restoration done. It's just the straight digital transfer with the best light color correction using DaVinci. But we didn't do any other further color correction on it. And as most of this audience will know, this is all done optically, no Final Cut magic. So I have a special guest here, Kurt Markham, in the audience. He's helping me with the video camera. When he was 12 years old, he made an stop motion, called animated feature-length film by harboring up in his bedroom and cutting out construction paper and creating this story. And I just find it really fascinating that he had the filmmaking acumen and discipline that he had when he was just 12 years old. I took some time to interview him about the process, about being a teenage filmmaker, and that's what this next clip is, part of that interview. It was at our studios in Rochester.
And I live in Rochester, New York. This is the notebook that I've had all these years containing the source documents for the search for Silver Spear. It's just a wealth of documentation that has allowed me to reconstruct the search for Silver Spear in the 21st century. So let's see what we got. Here's Search for Silver Spear. When I was a kid, I read a book from my local library, which was a biography of George Lucas. That really inspired me, and so I developed this story called The Search for Silver Spear, which I originally drew as a 60-page comic book in approximately 1985, when I was about 12 years old. Ended up working for educational software startups. I tried to keep filmmaking going on the side with my own projects off and on. And Silver Spear was always at the back of my mind as a project that I should revive, because I discovered at some point that I no longer knew where the VHS was on which I had finished the project. But I knew that I still had the Super 8 somewhere, and that one of these days I should get the footage retransferred and see if I can find the original handwritten script and see if I could reconstruct the movie. There was a screening in Rochester of a film made in the 1960s by a filmmaker from Montreal, which had been transferred and restored by Taylor Whitney at Preserving the Past. And after seeing that work, I got in touch with Taylor to have my Super 8 material transferred, and I have also recorded all my own voices again, reading from the script. And this time, because now we're in the age of desktop editing, I was able to properly synchronize the different lines of dialogue to the parts of the movie where they belong to make them synchronize with the mouth movements. One thing I discovered when I was going through the script and transcribing it into a screenwriting program, I discovered as I was going through the script that I would occasionally see a vertical mark between sentences or between words in a sentence in a character's line of dialogue. And at first I was puzzled as to what this meant and kind of ignored it. But after I started seeing this a couple times, it suddenly occurred to me, oh, wait a minute, this indicates a cut. This indicates a transition between when the character is on camera speaking and there's lip sync to be done, versus when the camera is cutting away to something else, like another character listening. And if I had not done that back in the late 80s, when I was making the film originally as a teenager, I would have found the synchronization much more challenging. But now I had a very precise record of what part of the dialogue was on screen, what part of the dialogue was off screen, so I knew what part of the line was supposed to match the mouth animation.
Fade to black. So I just find it so interesting that we still have the notebook. He has his notes. He has the production notes, the sketches that he drew. And I was talking this afternoon to another class about making films on digital now and what gets trapped on a hard drive. And in Hollywood, there's a big, there's a problem with independent filmmakers, and they go into a lab. They rent a post-production lab to do all the editing and the finalizing of the film, the post-production, and then they're off onto their next project, and the lab is left with all of these files, and they're too busy to really think about it. They're young, they don't know any better, and the lab just deletes the files. They're under no obligation to save these files, so it's a huge problem with digital filmmaking. And as an archivist, I can appreciate that Susie had her original scripts and he had his notebook there. And when I presented this to the Academy a summer ago, it was to the AMIA, which is the Association of Moving Image Archivists. And we're all like-minded about film preservation and what are we doing with the digital, which you can't, it doesn't have to be one or the other, but we have to figure out a way, how can we preserve our films going forward? So now I'll show you a clip from Kurt's animated feature, which, by the way, he's got it completely restored, and he's submitted to several film festivals, and he's won 2 awards, and it's exciting.
Silver Spear, are you ready for your rations? No, thank you. I don't eat hobgoblin food. If this is a hunger strike, Silver Spear, don't expect to be stopped. Why do you keep me alive? I thought you never took prisoners. Why don't you kill me? Some friends of yours come to save you. Then you and them will die. So you're using me as bait, is that it? Exactly. You scum. You think you can do it? shall execute them both as enemies of His Majesty, Lord Donron.
I say do it quickly, before they try anything.
Kill the male human first. He poses a greater threat.
That's prejudiced. Against women and elves.
So when I started working with Susie, this is how we got the films, which is indicative of a lot of archives that are in private collections, just, you know, in a baggie in a garage for 40 years. Luckily, Susan remembered. She has an amazing memory, and she remembered everything that it was. But sometimes we get boxes of stuff, and people just don't even know what's in them. And then now that it's going on to the third, fourth, fifth generation of people in the United States. Sorry, I keep leaning on the thing here. And then we go through and we catalog it, and then we prepare it for cold storage, and we put it in our cold storage vaults. Let's see. When she was just 15, she set up a fictional company called Falcon Films, and she produced these movies under that banner, and actually sold shares to her grandmother to purchase the film, purchase her film. No, something. What did you purchase with the? Because you got the editor with the pinky stamps. Oh, the splicer with. Anyways, there was about 3,000 feet of film, and they languished in her sister's garage for 40 years before we met, and we were able to get them digitized. Each of the movies, after we finished restoring them, we would have screenings, much like the world premieres that she had in the 60s and 70s. And it would bring people together that had acted in the movies, and her family and friends, and some business colleagues. And we started introducing the movies to explain, because of me, because I wanted it to be all about me and not about Susan. I wanted to explain the technology that went into it, and probably solicit a little bit more appreciation for how long this kind of projects take. And we ended up doing introductions that had technology, but also exploring Susan's desire to be a filmmaker as a young girl. This is a clip from the Brockville screening that we did on The Adventures of the Girls from Diddy, where she explains the filmmaking process.
Now, looking back after 40 years, filmmaker-director Susan Patrick introduces her film.
When I was a teenager, I was quite movie mad, and I set up my own little production company called Falcon Films. And I sold shares to people like my grandmother. And she never got any dividends, but she's actually in the movie, so you'll see my mother's mother in the movie today. The Adventures of the Girls from Diddy was my first movie. I made it in 1967. I shot it on Super 8 silent film. And in those days, nothing was instant. We'd shoot 50 feet of movies, like this amount, and mail it off to the Kodak lab in Toronto and wait 2 weeks to be able to actually view the movies. So today, everyone gets all this instant video, but I had to wait, get it back, and then I'd manually splice and edit the movie and put it together. After I put the movie together, we recorded my mother doing the narration.
Of course not. I remember it well.
My sister Barbara playing the piano, and Barbara recorded this on her stereo reel-to-reel tape recorder on 2 different tracks. And then we played the tape recorder. Barbara would man the tape recorder while I did the projector. And I was always trying to move the projector speed to keep in sync with the soundtrack, but now, thanks to digital technology, it's all locked in place, so you don't need to do that. The Girls from Diddy were loosely based on some short stories that I wrote, and they were serialized in my high school newspaper. And the Girls from Diddy were schoolgirl spies, a sort of cross between the Men from U.N.C.L.E. and the Girls from St. Trinian's. And in 1969 was The Closet Murders. And then in 1972-73, I shot The Prisoner of New Glasgow, aka The Prisoner of Zenda. And Alice again is in there. But I never finished Prisoner of New Glasgow, and now thanks to the miracles of modern technology, Taylor and I are going to finish the movie, and we'll have its real world premiere.
Thank you.
So that brings us to our Prisoner of New Glasgow. And it was inspired by the 1952 classic comic that Susie read as a teenager. based on The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope. And she wrote a script, she gathered her friends, they made costumes and props, and they shot it where her family had a cottage in the Laurentian Mountains just north of Montreal. If anybody's familiar with the story, it's about a king that gets kidnapped and his distant cousin has to impersonate him until he gets rescued. There's a lot of rescuing in her movies. She was able to take on such a lofty subject because she had a brother-in-law who happened to have a twin brother. So they were both in the movie. This is the original script, where you can see her notes and her like script supervisor notes. And this is Susie here in the corner with her in her typewriter. Yeah, right? The typewriter. She was so meticulous, she even walked around with the comic book and made tick marks after she had shot a scene. It's just amazing what she did and what she was able to accomplish at such a young age. As I mentioned, they made their own costumes, and the one on the right, the cape, was Alex, who's the king's half-brother, the one that orchestrated the kidnapping because he wants to take over the throne. It was his own from being in the intelligence corps, and his helmet came from the Canadian Black Watch 3rd Battalion Museum in Montreal. So they were very resourceful. And you can see on the shoulders of the henchmen, she used Christmas tinsel for the epaulettes. And this is the balcony scene where they're watching the coronation parade, and the woman who was doing the narration for Diddy is in the purple skirt right here. That's her mother, who played a character in the film. And this is an example of the props. So she had food out on the table, she had the knife, she had the bottle of wine that had the drugs in it that made the king fall asleep so he could be kidnapped. But you might notice that there's somebody in sandals here and somebody in pink striped pants. So she always shot from the waist up, so that sometimes they were even barefoot. Let's see. It's just amazing when you watch these clips that you can see the actors really take this seriously. Like, it's quite professional actually for their acting, and it was on silent film. Right. So one of the scenes was shot on a train because the fake king had to travel from England to the fictitious country of Arunia, where the film is set. And this is Susan explaining how they did the train scene. Any questions on this aspect of it?
At New Glasgow, he had a trailer as a sort of guest cottage. It looked a bit like a train because it had the table and the two seats. And my mother said, get people outside to push the trailer like that, to jiggle it, to make it look as though they're on a train. No, I was holding the camera straight and everyone outside was jiggling the trailer.
However, the one scene where the train tracks were going like this, sort of at a diagonal, that was Susan. And she was doing this with the camera to make it look like it was moving. So Susan's original intention when she started making the movie was to have the main character, Percy, here on the left, well, many years later, 40-some-odd years later, narrate the whole movie. But life got in the way, and the movie was never finished. Her sisters moved to Montreal. She went to school and then moved to Australia for several years. And the unfinished film was never edited together. It just languished in her sister's garage for all this time. And once we embarked on restoring the film, her brother-in-law, John Kellett, thankfully was still married to her sister, and and agreed to revise his role as Percy Sinclair, the fake king, and reminisce about his time when he saved the king and fell in love with the princess. And here's a clip explaining that.
My story begins when I, Percy Sinclair, read in the newspaper of the silver jubilee of the King and Queen of Arunia. The notice caused me to ruminate on an adventure in my past and of the woman whom I once loved. It is 25 years since I've seen her, less since I've thought of her, but never have I spoken of her. I was sworn to secrecy, but now that so many years have passed, I see no harm in attempting to put down on paper the events that occurred on my fateful visit to Arunia.
So by having John narrate part of the film, it started to help the viewer understand the plot of the story, which is actually quite complicated, and we had him only narrate part of it to sort of piece the puzzle together. This footage was shot on High 8. The original footage was shot on Super 8, and then that footage went into the vaults for another 6 or 7 years until we got finished with her other movie and then started restoring this movie. And during that time, Susie always had the idea, or, you know, what can I bring to the movie when we get started restoring it? And she travels quite a lot, so she was taking pictures of video, SD video, while she was traveling in Europe, in Stockholm and the Baltics, and a lot of these places that she went are very historical, and they don't look contemporary, so they really worked to set the scenes for establishing shots throughout the movie. And this is Susie talking about the location shots.
I shot a lot of it at New Glasgow, but once I had the footage digitized in 2006, on all my trips to Europe, I was looking for locations for filling in all the castles, the palaces, the coronation parade, and so almost all of that footage I shot on video, except the first funeral procession of Franz Joseph. I wasn't there in 1910 to do that. The Arunian Goats du Rome was shot in the Canary Islands. A lot of the soldiers were at the palace in Stockholm. But we also, in the parade, was the Black Watch Church Parade from years ago in Montreal.
And what was the shot of the Queen?
I was in London in 1969, and I went to the Trooping the Colour, and I got the Queen.
Special guest appearance. So close to the time we were starting to do this, a friend of ours sent us a clip of one of the first movies shot in England, and it was a silent film. I think it was 1927, and it just was one of those light bulb moments that gave us the idea to make it a silent film. And this actually helped really well because we were able to add title cards. We didn't have to have New John narrate the whole movie, which could get cumbersome and confusing, but the title cards interspersed between each scene and to move the action along really helped a lot. Throughout all of these productions or reproductions that we've done, we've tried to stay true to the era and use only her footage. She shot a lot of footage that was not for the movies, but it was actual home movie footage, like the Queen in England, and on her travels, and also just regular family movies. But there were some times where we took artistic license, such as in this scene, where even though they're title cards, we elaborated on them.
Percy's grandfather was actually a portrait of Prince Metternich with Anthony's head put on and some red curly hair. The grandmother was my mother's Aunt Annie. We have a portrait of her, so we put her head on the dress. And Alistair Kellett was the little boy with the red hair. So, yes.
So as you can see, we used photographs, and her grandmother didn't really have that dress. We put her grandmother's head on that, on that turn of the century dress. We used some original photographs. This is her photographs of her family photographs, but then we colorized them. Oh, hold on a sec. Let me just go back to that while I introduce this clip. There's a line in a scene in the movie where the fake king goes to stay at the inn, and he had heard on the train scene that you saw with the mysterious Madame M, that the people of Arunia really weren't happy that the king was becoming the king. His father died suddenly, and you'll see it in the clip, but she says that he was too full of wine and women. And then Percy makes a joke, and then she says, "Oh, sir, you are a card." So Susie wanted to make a play on that "you are a card" scene, and this is what we came up with. Oops.
I don't know whether people have any questions.
I used to be a filmmaker, and I love filmmaking. I just love what you did with the King of Hearts theme. So how did you do that? You put the two together, overlapping them, or?
Well, Taylor does special effects.
So a lot of the footage was underexposed, and there was a lot of footage shot in the prison, which was the root cellar at the family cottage. And there was just really no way you could see, even with all the color correction I tried, you just really couldn't see the footage very well. And it was a little frustrating on my part because Susie remembered it so blatantly in her mind. She thought you could actually see it, but you really couldn't see it. But she had the wherewithal with all of her movies to shoot production stills, and with this movie she had over 80 stills of behind the scenes. And so we got the idea to use the stills as setting the scene so that at least the part that you could see with the color correction was at least you knew what was going on, that it was the prison and the prisoner was being tortured or whatever. So here's here is a clip of the prison scene with photographs supporting the footage that was shot too dark. So we were really determined to use only our own footage and only our own photographs, but there were some things that we needed to use that we had to borrow from the internet. And, oh wait, sorry. That comes next. I'll just go to that slide. For instance, this 1910 map, and then we inserted the country of Arunia, and during some of the footage we zoom into that country. And then to go back, this was footage that Susan had shot when she was on a trip to England in 1969. And she was in an airplane with a camera overlooking the English countryside. So I just don't, leave it to her to have aerial footage of England in 1969. So one of my goals in editing together this footage and doing the restoration process was to try to make everything look the same. And we have high 8 footage, we have VHS footage, we have SD footage, we have HD footage, we have the Super 8 footage, and we actually even have iPhone footage. And have you ever seen a documentary where it's just all over the map with this footage and the viewer's just kind of going like, ugh, especially if you're into film and filmmaking, it's so distracting to have the filmmaker not put any effort into making it look a little bit like it's at least shot from the same camera. So my choice became, do I try to make Super 8 look like HD, or do I make all of these other formats look like Super 8 film from the 1960s? And I chose the latter because the Kodachrome is so beautiful. And you just really, with all the technology that we have and the budget that we were working with, we really couldn't make this SD footage look like HD. I mean, you just can't do it. So I ended up using, as you can see, this footage here from Stockholm. That's SD footage, and then over on the right is after some filters in Final Cut and some muting of the colors and adding some layers of 35mm film, clear leader, to try to make it look more like film and give it that nuance of Super 8 film. And these are some of the filters that I used. And then I used, I only put the filters on the new footage and the photographs, but not on the Super 8 footage. So this is another example of what it looks like before and after. This is a list of all the footage that we use. So I had this aha moment in the middle of the night that you tend to do, that maybe if I put a layer of clear leader over the new film footage, it would make it look like film. And so I digitized some clear leader, and it just didn't work. I was thinking it would add that depth that we needed. But what we ended up doing was scratching it a little bit, which is controversial to do that because that intimates that you're not taking care of your film, which a lot of people that do commercials and they're trying to do a retro look, and they'll add scratches and dirt, and it just looks really cheesy. So I wanted to make my own and not use the filters that are available out there, and ended up doubling that up on the timeline and using the other filters that I showed you in Final Cut. And this is a clip that explains that process, followed by some. The challenge of this film was that we had her original Super 8 footage that she shot the film with, which a lot of the scenes were quite underexposed. Then we had her home movie footage, like the parade footage and the swans. And so we married some footage in there that Nancy had. That was taken in Super 8 but transferred to VHS. And so we were working with VHS. And then we had her new footage that was shot on SD. And then we had new footage that I shot on HD. And then we had High 8, which was the narration. And then the stills. We have all of these stills. We thought this would be the perfect way to set the scene, because you can't, especially in the dungeon, it was very dark. Doing the color correction and trying to make all these different formats look somewhat like they were old Super 8 film that was shot in 1971, including the photographs. So that was a big part of the technical issues.
I remember very little, except the lovely Princess Patricia, the king's intended. All else was a blur.
To the play actor. I am about to leave for New Glasgow to meet Prince Alex. The king is imprisoned in the dungeon of the castle there. You may wonder why I should inform you of this, but you can trust my information. I am in love with Prince Alex, and I believed he loved me. I have no wish for him to seize the throne and marry Princess Berticia. Madame M.
So it's really been an interesting journey working with independent filmmakers to help their dreams come true, even if it is 40 years later. And with the, we just want to keep in mind, like, what are we doing with our digital files and how are we going to help, not you people necessarily, but archivists and producers help people resurrect their dreams. This, you know, later on when they don't have, they can't even access their hard drives. I'm going to leave you with a clip of Kurt talking about preserving film and what it was like for him to find this wealth of information in his archives.
The first typewritten draft opened with a dedication to 4 people who inspired the story. J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, Gary Gygax, who created Dungeons and Dragons, and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. I think I would have loved to have met George Lucas especially, and also Steven Spielberg, to thank them for their inspiration in encouraging me to be a filmmaker and to tell this heroic story based on their successful examples. As teenage misfits made good, and that was my hope and dream with Search for Silver Spear, to go from being just another teenager to being someone that told a great adventure story. So it's been a very enjoyable and exciting process to go through all these old materials to try to reconstruct this long-lost project. And it really shows the importance of preservation of these types of materials, because you never know what is going to be of value farther down the line. There have been so many cases where a project that wasn't paid much attention to in its day was hailed as important many years later. So film preservation and making sure that older materials remain available to newer audiences and newer filmmakers is very important.
Okay, so that concludes our presentation, and thank you for coming. And if you have any questions, the 3 of us are here to answer. Thank you. Yeah.